Hello, this is Fam Electric Ghost. We are recording. Do we have Siri Svegler? Do I have your name right?
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Great.
So we are recording. This is the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. We interview indie artists from around the world, and we thank you for joining us this morning. So we sent the questions ahead of time, so we'll start there.
Yeah.
So, like, we always like to ask all the musicians and songwriters that we talk to, like, when did you first get into music, and like what age did you start?
Yeah, I think my very, very first memories of singing, grandmother, because she would sing. She was also playing guitar and singing. Basically grew up with it, and she would always sing for me. We would sing in the car, and we would sing on trips to kind of kill time, and she would sing for me before falling asleep. So my very first songs are basically like Swedish lullabies that she would sing to me, and those are also songs that, have stayed with me forever.
So as a singer-songwriter, is your voice your primary instrument, or do you play other instruments like piano and guitar?
Yeah, I play piano and guitar too. Guitar was my first instrument that I started pretty, like, relatively late, I would say. I was early 20s, and I picked up a guitar, and it was like, it felt like home. I had it in my hands and very quickly, played my first chords and very quickly just started writing songs out of that. So it really felt like home right away.
So is the guitar like your primary writing instrument?
Yeah, I would say so. I use the piano as well, but it's more, piano is now more a way for me to maybe like check a key if I'm learning some material from other projects, or to kind of communicate what key I need something in, or check some things out. It's one of those things that's on my to-do list that I want to sort of develop my skills on piano. And yeah, who knows? Maybe now is actually a good time to do that.
Yeah, well, piano. I'm a keyboardist, producer.
Mm-hmm.
I started when I was 17. I was a
Yeah.
child of the new wave. I'm in my 50s, and so
Oh,
as soon
wow.
as I saw bands like New Order and Depeche Mode, Joy Division, The Cure, I went to pawn shops and found Moogs and Rolands,
Mm-hmm.
Jupiter 5, 6s and 4s, and I just started, learning by watching MTV. And it's like
Oh,
watching
yeah.
what the bands actually had on stage. Because back then you would see they had a Prophet 5 or they had a Jupiter 8, and I would kind of play to the video.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
So
Great.
yeah, so in today's world, with MIDI controllers and DAWs, like the synths or even this MIDI keyboards are a good way for even people who don't know piano, seem to like
Yeah.
producers are deriving everything.
Yeah.
It gets into another question a little further down, but when
Mm-hmm.
you said you basically you started very early with your grandmother in the
Mm-hmm.
songs. When did you realize that you had a talent to write your own songs?
I think it came sort of like, uh, I think for a long time I kind of actually questioned my talent, as I guess as most artists do. Sometimes we doubt a lot. But I realized I had a lot of fun with it really early on. I started kind of writing more a little bit sort of sarcastic songs, kind of joke songs, and then my friends really said, "Hey, Siri, you should continue. This is great." And I'm like, yeah, well, I am having lots of fun with this. And I think it's been like a gradual process, because at first it was more just like a fun thing for me to do. And then as time went along, and I got sort of feedback, or actually feedback from people that a specific song touched them in a certain way, and I realized that, wow, this is a way to like really connect, and kind of gave me like a deeper uh, yeah, like a deeper relationship to music and songwriting in general, that I felt it was a way to really connect.
Yeah, I find that a lot of times, like I was a poet before I was a keyboardist, and
Mm,
I had a big love of Victorian poets and like William Blake, Tennyson, Wordsworth, and I wrote all this stuff that was in
yeah,
that style. But I said, well, that's not really going to work with like new wave music or electronic music, but it could if I adjust it. So a lot of my poetry started
yeah.
to get adjusted because I was, paying attention to songwriters like Lou Reed and Dylan
Oh,
and Prince.
beautiful.
And
Oh,
then
yeah.
so if you look at Dylan takes all this really deep poetry and deep literary influences and turns it into either Americana or
Yeah.
folk or Woody Guthrie or Arlo
Mm-hmm.
Guthrie type stuff. So you can take poetry and adjust it, or take your diaries and adjust it. So when it came to your lyrics, did it kind of come from
Mm-hmm.
diaries or poetry, or did it come from just like, okay, it's the song in the moment, I just came up with it?
Yeah, that's a really great question, actually. And it's so funny that you mentioned that because my style has changed a bit over the years. And the very first songs I wrote were very much diary based. They were more like poetry or sort of prose that I had written. It took me a few years, I would say, to kind of until English became my writing language because I grew
Hmm.
up in Sweden. So at first, I wrote my very first poetry was in Swedish. And then I lived in London for 7 years. And when I lived there, I started writing more and more in English. So the very first songs were literally, notes that I had written when I sat somewhere in a little cafe, or, just like impulses and inspirations that I had had, and that then later on got, I always found it very, I always got very quickly inspired to put music to these words. I mean, sometimes, obviously have to tweak it a little
Yeah.
bit here and there to sort of rhythmically fit it, or maybe you change a word to make it rhyme in a better way. But the first songs were very much like that. And then over the years, a little bit it has changed as well. And sometimes I might have a melody or more like a song phrase right away. And then I build it from there, but then it's a song from the beginning. But my very first ones were actually, just like you mentioned, also poetry
Yeah, I found,
or
yeah,
texts that I
it's
had.
interesting with poetry because a lot of my poetry, I have all these books, notebooks full of poetry, and I found I had to
Mm,
take lines from like multiple poems to get them to work as
yeah,
songs. It's like sometimes I'd have ideas cross a bunch of poems, and then
yeah,
I kind
yeah,
of
yeah.
look at it, and then I think about it, then I kind of would run some of my synth stuff, and then kind of stream of consciousness be informed by what I had been looking at. So I had been looking at my notebooks,
Mm-hmm.
looked at like 5 or 6 poems, then started running my 808 or running my Moog drum machine or something, and then just kind of go on a mic and this kind of stream of consciousness, kind of beat poetry type of thing. And then I found it because I was
Yeah,
a big fan of Lou Reed, like I said, and like Dylan.
yeah,
And so I said, well, if I kind of,
yeah.
and I read a lot about Dylan, how he did stuff, and he tended
Mm,
to do this kind of stream of consciousness that was informed by stuff he wrote. So he would write all this stuff, and then he kind of listen to Robbie Robertson and the band, or listen to whatever his backup band was doing, and kind of
mm-hmm.
bring it in. Because it was at the top of his head what he had been working on, and he'd get it to work with the music and this kind of stream of
Oh,
consciousness kind
wow.
of feel. And that's been my style
Yeah.
that I felt it's actually gotten better and better, just because like if you write for a long time, you kind of know what to
Mm,
do when you hear a melody or you hear your piano or you hear
yeah,
something. Then you kind of it's in
yeah,
your head, it's in your consciousness, and the muse is calling it, but it's a lot of stuff. All your reference points are kind of in your like your toolbox as a musician.
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, no, I actually really I love Lou Reed as well. And what I listened to a lot to was also Leonard Cohen.
Yeah, yeah, good.
And for me, you can almost hear it like in these lyrics that it's a story. And a lot of the songwriters that I love to listen to, and singer-songwriters, is very much what really captures me is the fact that from the beginning to the end a story is being told. Like it's not just about the hook
Yeah,
or
yeah.
anything, but it's literally it's storytelling, and it's touching, and it moves me.
That's really interesting because we're kind of in a hook driven clip based,
Oh yeah.
world, that because we have all
Yeah.
these producers and they're all using DAWs and everything's on the grid, and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things are
Yeah.
sampled, a lot of things are clip based, and they're all looking for the groove. But like you have
Yeah.
a sense of style that like you remind me of Nora Jones, like song like I Don't Know Why. I hear
Oh, thank
like
you.
Carole King, like tapestry like songwriting, which it kind of goes back
Oh,
to the
thank you.
core of like the female singer-songwriters in the 70s, like Carole King and Tapestry.
Mm.
It's all stories. It's all
Yeah.
stories, even you get to the 80s, you have somebody like a Susanna Vega with like Solitude Standing or Tracy
Yeah.
Chapman. And that
Absolutely.
is, I've always been a big fan of singer-songwriters, whether they're female
Me
singer-songwriters
too.
or male singer-songwriters, just because like what you said, the telling of a story and
Absolutely.
the honesty of that story is more important than maybe the hook, and it becomes the hook. The
Yeah.
songwriting itself becomes the hook. And I think some
Yeah.
songwriters have forgotten that if you craft something with a lot of feeling, that can actually
Mm.
kind of be the overriding theme.
Yeah, I know. I have that sometimes, that feeling too, when I listen to music today. I mean, I would say I have a very broad spectrum
Yeah,
of the music I like to listen to, and I would say I'm very positive. I always try to find something in everything, and I can listen a lot also to charts, and it can be great and it can be really hooky, and but what sometimes I'm missing is that there's a sense of the dynamic in the storytelling that I sometimes miss. And it's almost like you can hear this sort of tension or this sort of concentration that happens when, a band goes into record that maybe earlier was more the case that actually now we're
yeah,
recording and, we have to get a good take. Like this philosophy of getting a good take with how music is produced today, I think that in certain genres, that maybe lacks a little bit because you can so easily punch in somewhere or like do another take, and maybe a little bit of this kind of yeah energy of like, okay, we're recording now, that I sometimes hear in older music, that it's not that kind of, it's so subtle, but it's like a little bit of a magic of that
yeah.
take, where you
I
have the
think that also a
feeling
lot of
and
people have forgotten that some of the greatest music has errors in it,
mm, mm-hmm.
has accidents in it. And the problem
Yeah.
with some of the DAWs, not that I don't use them, and there's a lot of artists I've interviewed, DJs and hip hop artists that can use these tools in really innovative ways. Um,
Mm,
but what happens sometimes is like there's a strive to make it sound perfect, and Exile
yeah.
on Main Street doesn't sound perfect. If you actually deconstruct it, there's a
No.
lot of errors that producers today probably wouldn't allow to go through, and that's a
Yeah.
problem if you think about it. Because if you take that record, it's got Keith
Mm,
Richards playing is not really on the beat. And
mm,
would a producer allow a modern guitar player to play like that? In a lot of cases, no. And that's a problem in terms of like art. If you take all the
yeah.
randomness out of something, then that's some of the beauties
Yeah.
getting like distilled. And so I think some
Yeah.
people have
Yeah.
to realize that it's not the perfect take; it's the feel. I'm more of a jazz-based
Absolutely.
guy.
The feeling.
Yeah, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
jazz-based
Oh,
musicians
cool.
are always going to have more feel.
Yeah.
You know, um,
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what I have. I would say the guys in my band they're all jazz musicians as well. And we very often, it's not about this, we're not music robots. There's a human factor to it and a feeling. And sometimes, mistakes can happen as well, and they can be very interesting
yeah, I mean, some of the greatest
also.
mistakes on great, Eric Clapton records, Beatle records, it's what made the song. Maybe
Yeah.
a key change that you shouldn't make, but you did, and then
Hmm.
it actually made you
Yeah.
go in a different direction, or rhythmic
Yeah.
change, or
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
used a chord that really should normally wouldn't be used, but it sounded interesting, and maybe if
Yeah.
nobody else ever did it, and that's the problem sometimes
Yeah.
with music. If nobody else ever did it, then sometimes the producer and engineer will
Yeah.
say, "We take that out." And maybe that's not the right decision. So as an artist, I think today you have to really stand up for what you believe in your music, or a lot of times
Yeah.
producers will try to totally run the show, and that's not bad if you don't know what you want. But if you do know what you
Yeah.
want as
Yeah.
an artist, you have to kind of strive to keep the original intent of what you were doing.
Absolutely. Or to protect the feel,
Yeah, protect the
so to
field. I don't have
speak.
a problem with all
Like,
these
yeah.
tools, but like really try to
Yeah.
maintain the honesty of what you were trying to do. Um,
Absolutely. The honesty. Yeah,
that's
that's
my
it.
main thing when I talk to musicians is like, and I like that's why I like to talk to singer songwriters rather than just vocalists that potentially didn't
Mm,
write their songs, because there's something about the
mm,
singer songwriters, like it's getting into the window of their heart and their soul, because they're the person that did it,
yeah.
right? And so if you're talking to an artist where they didn't even write their music, not that, vocalists and singers are artists, but I tend to
Mm,
focus when I talk to people about the people who actually have that singer songwriter tradition, which
yeah,
to
yeah.
me it just feels more authentic, and that's just my choice on
Mm,
who I choose to talk to. but
yeah.
but yeah, so I think we've talked about like who your writing influences are. You Leonard Cohen, you mentioned Lou Reed, but like I said,
Mm,
I found name
hmm.
check some people. But if people were asking you like who your influences or reference points are, are there other people that you're influenced by, maybe that we wouldn't
Yeah.
know?
Oh, yeah. Oh, that you wouldn't
Yeah,
know,
maybe wouldn't know, maybe
or
didn't
that you would know.
expect that you would be influenced by. Based,
Oh, anything unexpectedly. I mean, there has been quite a lot of, I would say, sort of more like progressive rock bands, like Swedish ones
mm-hmm,
that were kind of more like that. I would say that maybe my parents listened to that were more like sort of political,
mm-hmm,
political rock bands. And you probably wouldn't have heard of those, but they had just really amazing and alive lyrics.
mm-hmm.
And they also, there's one called actually Nationalteatern. It's called it's a Swedish name. It's called the National Theater. It has nothing to do with theater though, but
Mm-hmm.
that's what they were called. And they also made actually records for children where it was like a play, and there was always some, some message there.
Oh, like a
And
rock opera,
but
or they're like the.
yeah, 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 kind of. Yeah, it was just really interesting. Like they went through and they were, they went traveling and they met troubadours on the way and they sang songs about Vietnam. And it was like really, I was very captured by that as a child. And my sister heard it too. My sister is like 11 years older than me, so it was more her generation. But I listened to it a lot as well. So that influenced me as well. And also actually in terms of music with no singing, I've listened a lot to Keith Jarrett.
Oh, okay.
I love his playing, and in general also a lot of jazz
Yeah.
too, and a lot of jazz vocalists actually, which is maybe more um, it's not necessarily singer-songwriter, but for me, it's the same. It has a story. It has a story and intense emotion, like Billie Holiday,
Oh, Billie
for
Holiday. Yeah.
instance.
Yeah. That's a
It's for me, yeah,
that's a
like her
great.
voice changed so much
Mhm.
through from the first recordings to the later recording, but the feeling, like the way she touches your heart, like it's not just about the voice, it's really there's soul. I guess this is what people call soul, it's like the way her, yeah, just the way she phrases it and sings it just completely just goes straight into my heart.
Yeah, it's like when you get into the great soul singers like Teddy Pendergrass and the
Hmm.
Temptations and the Four Tops and Marvin Gaye, you get in this kind of soul zone.
Yeah,
Big fan of like James Brown, and just technically maybe he's not Sam Cooke, but it's the feel. It's like that
yeah.
kind of feel. We created a whole genre of funk, and and
Mm.
he did do soul songs in the vein of like a Sam Cooke. There's some songs that were like that, but it's like that passion that you get from the
Yeah.
soul and the jazz singers. I'm a big fan of bands like like Sun Ra and
Hmm.
the Mothers of Invention, Frank Zappa, just because they were very experimental. I'm a big fan of
Yeah.
progressive rock bands like Yes and Peter Gabriel's Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
Just because if you're a keyboard player and you're trying to learn the progressive rock bands like Yes and Genesis, they were the kind of, that's how I'm going to learn. Because
Yeah,
you
yeah,
see the
yeah.
level of complexity and they're mixing classical with jazz and rock, and it's kind of like, okay, well, that's the way where I want to live, is in that kind of zone as
Mm-hmm.
a keyboard player, because it gives me a wide area to go from, because I could go any
Yeah, of
direction
course.
when I listen to that kind of stuff. But, that's always been my focus, is anything that's more expansive. That's why I kind of named my music expansive, because then I'm not locked in.
Oh,
I'm not
cool.
locked into any one
Yeah.
genre. I can do hip hop, I can do new wave, I can do punk, which I like a lot of punk
Yeah.
bands. I like the Clash, I like the Sex Pistols, like
Mm-hmm.
Joy Division. The punk aesthetic
Mm.
is kind of useful in its energy. I think
Yeah.
people saw that with Kurt Cobain, because they saw that he could be like a John
Yeah,
Lennon figure, but he could also power out like the Ramones. But then he had like the
absolutely.
depth of writing, like a Beatle-esque writing with a punk aesthetic, which was like
Oh,
that
yeah.
was like very powerful to have both of those, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah, no. Mm-hmm.
so when you think about your music, your writing style, it's typical singer-songwriter, kind of like I said, it sounds in the vein of the classic songwriters from the 70s. But if somebody's going to ask you, it's like, what would you tag your genre as? What would you tell them?
Oh, what would I tag? Oh, I think when people ask me, oh, what style of music do you do? I usually say, well, it's singer-songwriter. It's pop, but with some kind of jazzy influence,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because
acoustic pop music.
I definitely hear that, especially when I was listening to your Awake album, and I
Mm,
really like some of the songs on it. The first track I like a lot. I like the No Need to Define. So much life.
yeah.
I like the feeling is very honest and very, it kind of pulls you in, and you do
Mm.
visually kind of see these stories. Like
Oh,
I
thank
like
you.
the idea of sound paintings. When I listen to music, I like to be
Yeah,
kind of brought into a picture. If you've got a good
yeah.
narrator, and you're painting a lot of great pictures with these songs that have this kind of melancholy to them, but they're not super
Mm.
sad. But it's actually it's cool. I mean, I like to feel that way. That's why I'll listen to the Tapestry, or listen to the Carpenters.
Yeah.
I mean, Karen Carpenter
Yeah.
had this like melancholy was just embedded in her voice. And anytime you listen
Yeah.
to a Carpenter song, even if it's somewhat upbeat, it still had this
Yeah.
melancholy to it. You know,
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
because the nature of her
Absolutely.
voice, and that always has been a draw. To me, like female singers that kind of go in that Karen Carpenter tradition. That's kind of where I'm always going to listen to people who sound like that.
Mm, oh, cool. Yeah, no, but it's interesting that you say about the sort of images as well, because very often when I do write songs or when I'm in that space, like a lot of it is actually it kind of comes to me through visions almost. Like even So Much Life, it was just this idea of just being in the moment and having, so I think it's, I say something like that, a bird took flight and landed on my restless mind. I really felt in that moment like I could literally hear this bird like leave the branch and take off, and the branch sort of shakes a little bit and you can hear the leaves and just these little sounds of nature and the images that come with it. It's very often actually the images in a way that inspires my songwriting.
That's interesting, because I watched a documentary with George Martin, the Beatles producer, and
Oh, yeah.
he had said that he could have recorded the Beatles, and they initially did, like they sounded in Berlin,
Yeah.
like a live band, and then when they got the Sergeant
Oh.
Peppers, he decided to bring the idea of if you look at like Monet, it's not real. He doesn't represent an actual reality. It's like
Mm.
it's a variation of reality. So he said, well, in
Yeah.
studio has the ability to create sound paintings. He actually used the term sound paintings, and I can color the sound using all these tools. And he had actually done all these Peter Sellers comedy records that the Beatles had actually listened to before they signed. And what was interesting about those comedy records is they had all these special effects on them. You had special
Oh,
effects, you
right.
had
Yeah.
backwards taping, you had all, orchestras and all kinds of things embedded. And so he had this
Yeah.
tool set to kind of bring us to the idea of Sgt. Pepper's. And it was kind of weird that it come from comedy records. And the idea of merging that created this kind of modern day song structure that we get with the Beatles, of being able to take an
Yeah.
album and make it more like a concept, or make it not exactly what you normally heard. You had all these layers, and that kind of is the
Right.
visual idea. The sound painting kind of starts with Sgt. Pepper's, gets even more refined with Hendrix, with Electric Ladyland, and then you get bands like Yes and Pink Floyd that take it even further. Um,
Absolutely.
but yeah, I think that's something I've always been drawn into, is the idea. I mean, even Hendrix talked about sound paintings when you talk at people, interviewed him about Electric Lady, because you hear birds, you hear like ocean
Yeah.
sounds. He was able to take the guitar and make it act like a synthesizer. And so
Yeah.
that's always been like, they would be able to color things with either your lyrics or with tools like synthesizers or backward taping, or granular sounds. Field recordings. It's always been something I've been very interested in, trying to make it more than just music, or either use your lyrics or use the
Yeah.
tools to make it have that
Yeah.
kind of capability.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah, thanks. That was really, I didn't know that. That's
Yeah, well,
really
I'm kind of
cool
a
to
music
hear. Yeah.
historian.
Yeah. No, but that's amazing.
But yeah, I think that's what
Mm.
always and makes me very encouraged when I see artists like yourself who are still rooted in the old forms, which I think are
Mm.
still. It's always interesting to take whatever tool. I get people on my end side of the world. We're all tied to like analog synths are the best, and then people will
Yeah.
denigrate samples and or say I don't like digital synths. But like, I use samples, I use digital, I use analog.
Mm.
It's like you kind of use whatever services the song, and
Yeah.
and I don't put down any modern technology. I might put down how somebody's using it, because I think some
Mm.
people maybe don't use it in the way I think they could. And so
Mm.
I think that the DAW is a good tool, and you can do great things with it. If you look at some hip
Yeah.
hop artists have taken the DAW and done masterpieces in terms of the layering of samples in very innovative and artistic ways, and other people have been kind of lazy with it.
Mm.
So it's a matter of, it's not that the tool is, it's like how you use the tool.
Yeah, absolutely. It's how you use it.
So like, when we get
True.
into your this album that you did, which I've been really listening to, because like your most current album, Awake, is just a
Mm-hmm.
great record. It just made me wonder: are you working on the follow up?
Yeah, I mean, I've been writing quite a bit of new songs that I haven't recorded yet, but I'm definitely working on new material all the time, and I'm learning also myself a bit more about audio engineering and the whole production side of things, which is, I guess, quite good nowadays because there's really not that many gigs happening.
Yeah,
So it was just a really nice coincidence that I had this course that I've been taking, and now I actually have a little bit more time to be a full-time student. And we can still get into the studio at campus and practice. So that's been also really great. And of course, I can combine that with my work, that I can practice recording, but also getting the chance to practice recording my songs,
yeah,
which
because
has
I
been
kind of
also
was
really
getting.
great.
There's a question talks about like music workflow in the digital audio workstation,
Mm-hmm.
and like home recording versus traditional recording. So it looks like
Yeah.
you're getting into like learning how to actually do some of your own recording on these home devices, right?
Yeah, I'm like right in the right in that phase, I would say. And it feels like a lot of hurdles to overcome right now because it's
Yeah,
I
it's
have yeah, it's until this point I wasn't so much in that process of things. Like I would be working with someone And now just getting used to working like with a big mixer, or even learning about like routing and signal flow and all this.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a parallel universe.
Well, it's its
It
own
was there
art.
all the
Yeah.
time, but yeah.
Well, recording engineers are artists in their own right, you know, producers, and
Absolutely. Oh
you know,
my God, I
and
have
some,
so much respect for that, especially now.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's just like there's so many, you know, people. I mean, a lot of times artists, okay, to be a musician or a singer-songwriter, it's hard enough to stay in that lane and perfect your work.
Mm.
When you take on the recording engineer and producer roles, is a whole nother level of artistry.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know, some people like Hendrix basically got into it because he was doing things that nobody had ever learned how to capture. So,
All
so a
right.
lot of the
Yeah.
engineers were like not capturing his sound, and so he basically had to learn how to use the board, because every time he let somebody use the board, they would try to edit out what he was doing. And so
Right.
sometimes if you're an artist and you're pushing the envelope, you kind of have to take it, because otherwise
Yeah.
you'll hear that they took out all your sound, and that's not what you wanted. So you end
Yeah,
up taking
yeah.
on that role just because you're so into trying to formulate that sound that you're like, well, I got to control it. And other
Oh
artists are
yeah.
like, okay, well, that doesn't matter as much because I think they can capture it
Mm.
without that. But you know, it depends on like the Frank Zappas and the Hendrixes of the world and Princes. You know, they felt like they had to control it.
Right.
But in this world with COVID, now artists are like, well, I can't
Mm.
get to the studio as easily, and I do want
Yeah.
to still produce work, so I guess I better learn how to do some of this stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can imagine that too. I mean, in my case, it was really a coincidence because I had started the course before everything with the lockdown, and but in general, I mean, I'm glad that I get a little bit more chance to spend more time on this and to learn it. But God, I mean, it's complex. It's not easy, and then to get it to a certain standard, I mean, it's
But
even harder.
have you
So.
found that you can control your sound? Like the one of the benefits, like I said, like once you start to learn it, you can say, "Whoa, wow! Now I can
Mm.
capture things and see how it sounds, and maybe you know the studio becomes like an instrument." And
Yeah,
then that,
I think
are you finding that?
yeah, I'm not there yet,
Yeah.
but that's where I want to, that's what I'm aiming towards, and it will be interesting to see. Like for now, I'm just happy to have a bit more that I can communicate also clearer, and maybe take over,
Mm-hmm.
like just have a bit more possibility to start getting creative.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so we'll see where it takes me. I'm quite excited, but I try to still stay just in the now and just kind of focus, because there's so much to learn, I feel right now. So right now I'm like, I try just to stay in today and focus on what I need to learn today, and then hopefully, in a year's time I'll look back and be like, oh cool, this is what I was learning it for.
Yeah.
So I mean, it
So
can't
is there any
hurt.
particular, you know, digital audio workstation that you are learning on that is like your preferred tool?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I prefer. I mean, we have to learn Pro Tools
Mm-hmm.
for school because that's kind of like the industry standard. Even though the last course I had, it was like that was the arranging course,
Mm-hmm.
and for that we used Logic. And I felt, for me as a Mac user, that felt, and I had done a little bit of GarageBand before. Logic just felt way more intuitive
Yeah.
to kind of get going with, but I can definitely see also how Pro Tools have so many different possibilities as well. But I am in no way near being a Pro Tools wizard at all. So, but I have I kind of also, that's the DAW that I'm working with at the moment, because we have to basically for
Mm-hmm.
school.
That's interesting because I've gone, you know, I started with like Ableton and then I decided to go with hardware recorders.
Mm-hmm.
So I've kind of gone back to I was, you know, I kind of show my age. I'm in my 50s. I started with like Tascam and Fostec, like hardware recorders, like reel to
Oh wow,
reels and
yeah,
tape machines that you punched in
yeah,
and punched out. You did overdubs,
yeah,
but
yeah.
you didn't have a grid. and I feel like I have more freedom when I'm in that kind of zone with these hardware recorders. So I'm kind of in this new movement of analog and modular synthesis guys. I have these modes with all these analog wires all over the place. But with these type of machines with the modes, they're kind of point in time, and it's kind of like the grid doesn't. Not that you can't do the grid, but it's kind of like a feel-based thing. And so I find that the hardware recording, the kind of 1970s style recording, kind of fits what I like to do. And so I've kind of gone a step back and put restrictions on myself. And I feel sometimes like it's good to do that. It's like what I've heard some people complain with some of the DAWs is you have so many choices, so many options, becomes overwhelming, and then you can't focus. And then what I like about the older technologies is like you only have a limited set, and then you can kind of focus on the music. And then
absolutely,
and that's what I prefer a little bit.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's also this thing of like when you have a certain or like say hardware, right? If you have like you'll get the most, you learn how to handle this one one thing that you have, and you get the most out of it rather than thinking, oh, the next thing and the next thing. And I really also have a deep respect for this kind of really getting to know your own equipment and getting the most out of it before having a bunch of new different gadgets as well.
Yeah, because if you're on a hardware tape machine, there's a certain capability it has, and you don't have unlimited options. You get to learn how to do it like 100%, and then in that you become like an expert at it, and then you can capture exactly what you want, and it's kind of feel based, and then later I can process it after I do it. I could bring it into a digital world, but. Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who have kind of, especially guys who use analog synths like Moogs and Prophets. We're kind of like into capturing it in an old school way on some of these older machines, just because you have more control over it.
Right.
And it just, it's just a choice. Not that, one's better than the other. It's just what we like to do. But it's interesting because of the lockdown. A lot of artists have been perfecting their craft. I've talked to artists that like, oh, I'm a guitar player, I'm going to learn bass, or I'm a bass player, I'm going to learn guitar, or I'm going to go learn keyboard because I didn't know how to do it, or I'm going to pick up, another wind instrument, so I'm going to pick up the flute. I'm a clarinet player, and I'm going to learn how to play flute better. It seems like a lot of people are doing that. I've talked to a bunch of artists in the last, a couple months, and a lot of them are going in that direction.
Yeah. I mean, that's great. I mean, there's really like I literally I have no excuse to not get up every morning and sit half an hour and just practice um, on my piano. There's no excuse not to do that. I mean, I haven't yet. I mean, I've done a little bit more practicing, but I would love to have a routine to really have a daily practice and to notice results, of course, after a while, because I think that's with a daily thing, like when you really get to that moment, like, oh wow, it's really paying off, and I'm getting better at it. And I think it's that because at the moment I'm in a place where I'm learning so many different things, it feels like that I'm not yet at the space where I feel like I can really, because right now it's just a lot of input, and I kind of longing, and I know I have to keep up this momentum because at some point there's going to be this moment where I feel like, oh wow, this is what I'm learning, and I'm getting a little bit more better at this. So yeah, no, but there's definitely like sitting down at my piano and practicing a little bit is definitely something that's for this month with all the gigs again being canceled. It's something I really want to do.
So has there been like a lot of times I've been working with some people, some of my booking agents, because we can't go anywhere, are trying to get me onto like online venues and online events, and I've been actually doing my own through like Twitch and Facebook Live and Instagram Live because I have a home studio set up with cameras, and so I'll just like record a session and then push it out. But have you thought about like lining up with that, or is that some artists have kind of come back and told me, well, I can't really do live on the net because I kind of need the crowd, and when I do it, I feel like I fall flat because I don't have that crowd interaction. What are your kind of thoughts about that?
Yeah, I haven't done the only thing I did was that like that goes a little bit in that direction, and I had a concert for a very limited number of we had a limited audience, but they were live streaming it as
Mm.
well.
Oh, okay.
So I've done that. I've never, no, wait a minute. I did sing a few songs live. That was another event, actually. It was not my concert per se, but I was there as a guest singer and I sang a few songs. And I don't think I have enough experience to really feel, because I could still see the audience, like it was a kind of like
Hmm.
a Zoom
Yeah, yeah,
Zoom setting, so I would see the people still. I mean, those that had their camera on, and I mean, of course, it's like it's not to be compared, but I would be open to. I mean, if the opportunity came up again, I think I'd be open to giving it a go for sure. I know a few venues, they had also the opportunity I mean, it was sort of talked about, but then it never happened to actually do the concert in the venue with no audience
yeah.
and to
That's a
have it
lot of that
streamed.
in the States. There's a lot of that going on.
Mm,
There was a band
yeah,
from Colorado called Tennis, and they actually went to a TV studio and did like an
yeah,
hour and a half concert, and there was nobody there except the camera crew and the sound people, and
yeah,
it was like a paid event. And there's a lot of that. The band
yeah.
The Gorillas is getting ready to
Yeah.
do like a concert like that.
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, I think I would be definitely open to doing that. And I mean, in a way, yes, you don't have a live audience, but also coming from because in the past I did more of acting and you're on set and it's kind of like you're on set, you don't have a live audience, but it's still you are in a way communicating something. And
Yeah,
even though
there's a
it,
camera,
yeah,
so you kind of play to the
absolutely.
camera. And so if you have that
Yeah,
acting ability, I think maybe it's easier if you're coming from like a Bowie-esque feel
yeah,
where you're more theater and it's
yeah.
part of your show. Then I think it's easier. I think for bands that are kind of like Grateful Dead type of bands that kind of feed off a
Of
big
the la
audience,
yeah, I think
it,
that
it
would be very
it's kind
hard,
of
yes.
harder for them because they
Yeah,
can't get the feel. You know.
absolutely. So I think it's all about what is the what's how easy is it to adapt to this very new setting, and if it's something that somebody wants to try or not, or even they might try it and be like, oh God, that was horrible. I never want to do that again, or be like, oh well, that's interesting. Let's let's see how it goes. I think it would be more the latter. Just be like, okay, let's see how this goes. I mean, I did when I did this streaming concert. It was maybe 10 people in the audience because it was a rather small venue, so they really couldn't have a lot of people in there, and with the distancing and everything. But it was quite
Yeah.
sweet because, like, my mom from Sweden, she was able to see the concert, and it was just quite nice to know that uh, my near and dear people or my family, they could actually be there as well in a way.
Well, I think it's interesting. It's interesting because like when I started Family Electric Ghost, I actually was on Periscope and I would do like Facebook live from my studio,
Mm,
and I have this whole like stage persona where I get in an LED outfit and I wear like a phantom mask that's like LED, kind of like
yeah,
EDM or Dead Mouse. But I have continued to do that since 2016, so I've been able to keep like a certain set of my fans know I do that, and I
mm,
can get like 3,000-4,000 people to watch one of
yeah,
my shows,
yeah, yeah,
and it's just something I've been doing, and I was
mm,
doing it before
yeah, yeah,
COVID, so I kind of felt it kind of works for me, and
absolutely,
it's
yeah.
actually gotten better.
Yeah,
um,
I think
but
that really also plays a big role as well, because I think a lot of people who have been into the live streaming and this live on social media before, I think the switch has not been a big a big thing to get used to, and I think a lot of it could actually be, you would just continue something that you had already done. Whereas, if someone had never done that before, it'd be like, okay, where do I even begin with this?
yeah,
Yeah.
well, there's all kinds of equipment that 4 years ago when I started, and now you can have like, your own video switcher there
Yeah.
that's automatic. You have like 3 cameras, you can have a green screen, you can embed effects. So then if you get into the situation where you actually can charge for it, like, and now Facebook actually allows tickets, then you have a show that more likely somebody would pay $5 for, because you're actually, have effects, and you have, visuals going on, a green screen going on behind it. So there's all kinds of stuff you can do if you get into it. It's like the research you have to do to figure it out. And, in the world where it wasn't COVID, like, why would you spend the money on, 3 cameras and a video switcher and a online mixer to get it over the net?
Yeah.
Well, why would you do that? But now, if you can't play anywhere, it might be a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
So more and more bands I talk to are like, well, I never thought of doing that because I invested in my RV and my tour bus and my, my roadies. But now, I can't do that. So maybe I will invest in that.
Yeah, sure. So, no, I mean, I like I said, I wasn't, before I didn't do really any kind of live streaming. And since COVID, there's been a couple of opportunities to do it. But I've never really, in terms of like having live, or any of those like live options like on social media that you can do. I've always been a little bit shy, I think, to do that. Be like, hey, we're live here and there. But who knows? Maybe, who knows how this
well, it
phase
depends
will.
on how long it takes a vaccine to get developed before we can get back to normal. Like in 2021, if we're still waiting until 2022 for vaccines to be at like 98% efficiency, then then we might we'll see more and more bands switch into like either play in a venue with nobody there streaming it, and getting on HBO and Showtime with the bigger bands, doing that. Which I see that happening more and more, but it's just the more mid-range bands I'm trying to, hopeful of, being an indie musician. A lot of musicians make their money from touring, and without touring, they're losing like a big leg of their support. And so there's got to be a way to get, there's a lot of bands I've been seeing trying to get their music into video games, trying to do sync licensing, trying to get stuff into movies and TV. I do see in your write-up that you have been able to do the sync licensing probably better than a lot of bands that I've talked to, because you've gotten your music into films and commercials and TV. And so that's the kind of where people need to be right now.
That's true. Actually, I mean, that's where I have, and very, very lucky, actually. I'm very, very happy about that too. That was a large chunk, actually, of my income this year, was this, actually, if I can call it passive income, but actually like royalties from, and so it was so helpful right now in this phase, because a lot of my gigs just fell away, but I was still somehow able to have an income during this time. Very, very grateful. I mean, not to be taken for granted at all. So
that's really good. Maybe you can talk about like how you were able to do it. 'Cause a lot of bands don't have that leg. They a lot of, at least in America, there's a lot of bands that they just heavily tour. They sell their T-shirts, they sell their merch, but they haven't been able to get into sync licensing. They haven't been able to do that. Do you have any kind of hints or how you did that?
Well, how it was for me is that I very early on in Berlin, like I've had the same publisher for since I started, basically, and they are not specialized in singer-songwriters at all. So it was a little bit of like, okay, so we'll try this, So they took me on as a singer-songwriter, but what they actually are focused on is film music. So they sometimes pitch me along also to, when they have other pitches. So it kind of, for me, it goes via my my publisher, actually, and they've been doing a lot of great work, actually pitching my songs. So I'm very, very grateful for that.
I was able to join some organizations that had, I have some publishers that are going in that direction, and I'm a part of some other like organizations that actually pitch me in that way. And I made sure I signed up a couple of years ago to be on stuff like that. And, I think that's just like a lesson, for every band to kind of look at your publisher, look at your agents, where are they sending your stuff? Be involved a lot of musicians are like, well, I don't want to get into business, and they just are totally focused on the art. But it kind of like, if you're like an independent musician, part of being an independent musician is kind of that there's a certain level of business savvy you have to be aware of.
Yeah, and yes, and I really think also in terms of because at that point, that's kind of like when you give your art away to someone, right? It's like, yes, I think every artist wants to be really more focused on creating, but at some point you give away your product, and I think it's important to know what's going to happen with my product. Where is it going to go? What are those people who are now in charge of getting my work out there? What are they actually going to do with it? Where is it going to be? What channels is it going to be distributed on? What's happening with it? I mean, of course, at the beginning, I didn't really. It also was the same. I just wanted to make music. But then you go through. You might even have a couple of experiences where you're like, oh, what's happening now to the music? And I would love to see some statements and these kind of things. And then you do start to take more of an interest what's
Yeah.
currently happening to your product.
Yeah, because you want to know what the split is, how
Absolutely,
much
yeah.
are you getting, you want to know, where are they pushing, what markets are they pushing your
Yeah.
stuff into? Are they doing the sync licensing? How much of that, make sure you own your copyrights and
Yeah.
because a lot of what I do with the Ghost, I've created characters,
Oh.
like Josephine Electric is a
Yeah,
character,
yeah, yeah,
and I kind of, I legally set her up, and she, it's a creation through vocoders. I used a lot of electronic gadgets, and I decided to kind of go in a Bowie-esque way of actually creating kind of like the Gorillas, where Damon Albarn created all these characters like 2D and all these characters in his band.
yeah,
I said, well, I like that idea. I like what Bowie did with Ziggy.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I decided to use vocoders to create this kind of female or alternate version of myself, who
Cool.
is Josephine Electric,
Yeah,
and she's the lead singer of my band.
yeah, yeah.
And so I created a whole mystique around that, and copyrights and all kinds of stuff, because it's kind of theatrical.
I love
It's
it.
not exactly what
Yeah,
what you normally would do, but it's like that's my kind
yeah.
of edge
I mean, I love
what I
it.
do.
That's amazing.
But I think a lot of artists forget, like you're saying, they don't get a handle on the potential, like being able to put their music into films
Yeah,
or video games or commercials, and they don't know what their agent's doing. They don't know what their publisher's doing. They kind of like, okay, well, it's like a black hole, and they have no idea what's going on.
yeah,
So it's cool that you actually know what's going on with your music, because some artists, the history of musicians are, some of the greatest artists, like Hendrix, didn't know anything about what was going on.
yeah.
You know,
Okay, yeah. I mean,
yeah, and the greatest guitar player ever, and he had one of the worst deals in publishing ever done.
yeah. It's sometimes kind of sad to think about these. But I think also it's like sometimes at the beginning, or like when you're just starting out, it's also the whole thing of even that somebody's taking an interest. And I think a lot of artists, they they sometimes tend to go for the first thing that's being offered, because there's a little bit of maybe fear. It's very often like it's maybe now today, so we have so many more options as well, and you can easily, put your own product out there, and there's so many more possibilities. But I think that as a young artist starting out, I mean, I think it might be a good idea to really, stay centered and be like, okay, well, I'm going to have a look at a few different options, and not just, take the first thing that's being offered to me, because it's not always the best for you.
Yeah. Usually the first deal is like the worst deal ever.
Yeah.
Because it's like nobody has any history on you,
Yeah.
so they tend not to give you the best your royalty rate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you own your masters? Do you own the publishing? What's going to happen if they license it to a movie? How much of that are you going to get?
Yeah.
And people don't even think about that. They're like, well,
Absolutely not. Yeah.
I just want to get tour support. I want somebody to send me a van.
Yeah. I mean, I think a
Like a
lot,
lot of
yeah.
American bands are like, give me some roadies and a
Yeah, yeah,
van,
yeah.
and I'm a
God.
set.
I mean, I think a lot of these things you start to think about once you've made the first bad experiences. like, oh, what, I don't get my master? Really? What's happening to it now? It's like 10 years old. Do I not have the rights now? And then you start to
Yeah.
think, okay, like when you first make some experience with it, that's when you actually start to pay attention to these things. But I think at the beginning, unless you've had a lot of time studying music, the music business side of things, it's not really the first thing that comes to mind. The
Yeah,
legal
most
aspects.
musicians are trying to get the gig,
Yeah.
and they'll sign anything to get the gig. Like if I can
Yeah.
play at CBGB's, I'm going to sign the paper. If I can play at the Whiskey a Go Go, I'm going to sign the paper, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of bands, as soon as they get an agent says they'll get them into the Whiskey Go Go, oh, I'm done. I'm done.
Yeah.
It's like I'm just signing, because they're like, oh, I'm going to play CBGB's. Boom, they're gonna do it,
Yeah.
and then that's where they kind of get caught, where like, oh, the agent's taking 75%, you're getting
Yeah.
20. You know?
But hey,
But
like sometimes, these are experiences that I mean, it's rather not make them, but hey, I definitely believe that everything happens for a reason. And if it's a certain experience that I'm meant to have or that we're meant to go through, we go through them and we learn and we can do it better next time.
so one question I always ask is like, do you collaborate with other artists or writers, or
Yeah, I love it
um,
actually. I
have
love
you been
collaborating.
doing a lot of collaboration?
Yes,
Have you been doing that lately?
yeah, I have. It's actually I love it because it's just something it opens me up to new ideas and new energies. And I've done a few different things. I've done some more sort of like deep house projects too, where I then have like an instrumental already and I write lyrics and melody to it.
Oh, cool.
And then I record it here and I send it back. And so we've done a few of those actually. We had a few years ago, there was like this song, A Stormy Water. That's also a
Mm-hmm.
bit of more house, like electronic music. And every now and then there's a collaboration like that. And I actually really enjoy it because for
Yeah, it
me
said
it's,
you collaborated.
yeah.
Yeah, Moonbootica,
Oh yeah.
Johnwaynes, Lorenzo. So your MasterCris. So in some of those, are you just doing like the top line
Yeah.
on top of something,
Yeah.
the EDM? Yeah,
Exactly.
that's cool.
And recently, actually, even got a opportunity to do a rap. There's like a rap artist here in
Oh, a
Berlin.
feature? You did a
Yeah,
feature?
yeah.
You did
So
a feature
he
on?
raps in German, and we just got together, and I kind of, yeah, we jammed a little bit, and then yeah, and then I wrote some like the vocals or like the melody in English
Yeah.
then. So there's like this little English featured bits of singing on
Well, I
it.
think that's really cool because I think it opens you up. It's like, especially when you
Yeah,
cross genre, to get into like EDM and hip hop DJs and, electronic music. It kind of opens you up because, like, if you look at a band like The Clash,
mm,
they were a punk band,
yeah,
right? But then when they got to like combat rock and Sandinista, they brought in hip hop,
yeah,
and I think that really changed the nature of like where a punk band can go. And
yeah,
you started seeing, because the Clash did it, then you had other kind of post-punk bands mixed genres,
hmm,
and it made the music better because it wasn't just stuck in a Ramones
yeah,
style or Sex Pistols style of music. If you can open it up, there you can bring ska, you
yeah.
can bring reggae,
Um,
you can bring hip hop. Then you have a wider audience too.
yeah, absolutely. And I also think that collaborations can really help with writer's block. And like if
Yeah.
whenever you're stuck or something, and then you get a collaboration, it just okay, write some lyrics for this, and it just opens you up again, and you can really bring you into a new flow.
That's why I love, like, when I've ever, because I'm a one person band,
Mm,
but and I have all this equipment, all these drum machines, all these analog synths. But sometimes I'll bring in like a live drummer, or
yeah.
I'll bring in a guitar player, and so I love, I started when I did music. I was in 4-piece bands, like
Mm,
rock
mm-hmm.
outfits, bass players, drummers. I'd be a keyboard, kind of like the Doors. I'd be in bands that were set up like the Doors.
Yeah.
So they always have a keyboard player in them, or like Deep Purple always had a keyboard player, or Yes. And just that live playing, because I tend to be the songwriter most of the time. I was the primary songwriter in these bands. But, when I brought something and the drummer took my 808 beat and then opened it up to like real percussion, like a live drummer, it was always like, I loved it. I wasn't like a control freak and say, hey, don't do it like I did on the 808. I was like, no, just do what you feel. And I would tell the bass player the same thing. If I wrote a bass part on my Moog, like I let the bass player kind of interpret it. And, 9 times out of 10, I let them take whatever they took out of it and let it just stay that way. And I love that kind of collaboration with live musicians. There's nothing like that.
Yeah, no, me too.
Have you ever like recorded a song with a band and actually wrote it because you were with the band and came up with something brand new because you were actually with a live band?
Well, not in terms of like not together with a band, but definitely I sometimes work like with the guitar player in my band. We have written a few songs that definitely would not have happened if it wasn't for him and his ideas and what he brought to it. And there have been moments where he would, for instance, say, yeah, I have this idea, and he plays something, and then I get inspired from that. So it wasn't really originally my musical idea. It was something that he would bring in. But we haven't done that yet with the whole band. I think that that's an amazing thing too. It can be probably tricky as well, but
it's tricky. It's hard because people don't like paying for the studio time. Like in the 70s, bands used to have enough money from the advance that they could go in with minimal ideas and record it all in the studio.
Yeah, God, that has
and
really
a lot of times
changed.
that doesn't really happen as much anymore. But the result of that stuff is some of the best music, the music I like a lot. Just because those happy accidents of those, it's basically live recording, stuff. And when you do that, there's tendency for things to go in a different direction, which is very interesting musically to me.
Absolutely. But I would love to do more of that actually. I mean, if it was possible. I sometimes find myself even in sound check or something. Just the last time we actually had a replacement gig for a gig which was supposed to happen in April, and we were finally able to do it again in October. And it was in a really nice space here is in a jazz venue in Berlin. And even just during sound check, hearing the band, and they were kind of jamming a little bit, and even that just gave me a bunch of ideas. And I was just thinking, God, how it would be so great to just get together with everyone and just do some songwriting.
Yeah. My long-term goal, because I live in New Hampshire, is to actually build like a studio and encourage that type of recording. My long-term goal for what I want to do when I retire, because I have a day job that's pretty good. I'm an IT guy. So one of my ideas is to build a recording studio in the Lake region of New Hampshire and kind of give artists a way to get out of the city, out of Boston or out of New York, and have this kind of pastoral setting where they can really jam, basically encourage like jam sessions to become recordings, because I think that actually is valuable to the creation of music. And so it's a long-term goal to create a studio that's kind of primary purpose is to get bands to do that and not charge them crazy money.
Oh, that's beautiful. Long-term
for doing that. That's the idea. But because I think there's something missing in music when you can't do that. And I just feel that, in the way I do this podcast for free, I think there should be a certain level of stuff that just is done, because kind of back in the 60s, there were a lot of bands that were just part of these communes, and they would just, do it like the Dead. The Dead was kind of like, they never made money on their first concert. They were all free, and this idea of having this kind of communal, kind of just in service of the music idea is just something I'm trying to, get a collective to get into that.
Beautiful.
but it's great having you on the program. And
so happy that we finally.
If you have a new project, we love to have other artists come on to like push their next set of work. So when you have another album or a single you want to promote, we encourage you to come on the show.
Great. And, thank you. I will. it might take a little
And we're
time
gonna,
before the next one,
yeah,
but it was
that's fine.
really
Well,
nice to
well, we've seen people 6 months to a year after,
yeah,
so
great.
the
Wonderful.
first interview.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for having me on the show.
Well, this will get published today,
Mm-hmm.
before noon. It will be on. We're on 11 podcast platforms. We are actually part of Spotify. Anchor FM is a Spotify company,
Okay.
so we will be on Spotify podcast. We'll be on Apple Podcast and Radio Public, Overcast. There's 11 platforms we're on, and so this is gonna like automatically publish to all those 11 platforms throughout the day. Once I get it
All right.
put together in the next hour or two, and we'll send you the link to the Spotify version, the Anchor version, and the Apple version.
Wonderful.
So thank you for being on the
Yeah.
program. Everybody go out there and Svegler,
Yeah.
please, check, fans of your music. I always tell people, like, if you can get the album on Amazon or
Mm-hmm.
iTunes and purchase it, remember, like, artists, it would appreciate that. It's a good idea.
Yeah.
If you love the artist you listen to, don't just stream it, purchase it and download it for any artist you love,
Yeah.
including Siri.
Oh,
So thank you for being on the
thank
program.
you so much for inviting me. I had a great time. It was so great to hear you as well. Very inspiring and work you
Thank
do.
you.
Yeah. So we'll see you next time. All
Okay,
right.
great. Have a